let's get into the purpose of emotional management. And this is particularly important for my Black girls and my women of color, right? Because you have learned to take life really seriously. As successful Black women, as women of color, we have nuanced experiences that are different from white women's experiences. You are not always given the space and the permission to fully express yourself and fully express your emotions. So you've learned to minimize your emotional experiences in life overall. And this is part of the reason why when it comes to being in relationships, it's so challenging for you to manage your emotions there. Does that make sense, right? And I want to make sure I'm talking to all of you, right? If this makes sense for you, make sure that you tap the screen on TikTok and heart it up on Instagram. Tap the screen and give those likes and hearts too, right? So for Black women and women of color in particular, life has told you that you cannot be your big, bold self. When you show up in spaces and in rooms and you're all of yourself, you are labeled as when you show up in spaces and you are fully all of yourself, you're labeled as angry, you're labeled as aggressive, you're labeled as intimidating. And other people in the space do not respond well to the fullness of you. And so you learn to minimize. You learn to shrink. You learn to reel your emotions in order to be accepted in professional spaces, in collegiate spaces, right? That's the nature of life. And even within your family dynamics and your family structure, you may have been taught by the women in your family that you're too much, that you need to calm down, that you need to minimize, you need to reduce yourself, especially if you were a Black girl with big dreams, like myself. Girl, calm down. That ain't ever gonna happen. Relax, right? Don't get too excited. Don't get too hyped. That don't happen for us. All of this negative rhetoric around why it is beneficial for you to shrink and get small and minimize your emotional experience. And so what happens when you get into relationships, you don't exhibit the same type of emotional management because it's the only space that you have to be open. It's the only space that you believe you should be allowed to just show up and be. But unfortunately, there has to be strategy, there has to be structure, and there does have to be emotional management when it comes to relationship spaces. So what I'm telling you to do is really the opposite of what life tells you to do. It's the opposite of what you've learned as a woman. You want to manage the emotions when you're in the relationship spaces, and you want to allow the emotional experiences to be as big as they need to be when you're in your overall life space. Does that make sense?